Okay, gentlemen. So last week we had, if you were not here, or hopefully were able to watch a little bit of that on the recording, I started this series on Christ culture and nationalism, and the main thought behind last week was this understanding that you and I have a worldview. And so I decided to put that chart on your handout again so that you can see that and to understand that where you were born, the environment in which you were born, the education that you have, the experiences that you have, all go about as a part of shaping who you are and how you think. And then the words and languages develop as you try to express what that environment and that language is like. That then in turn shapes your thoughts, your ideas, the dreams, the visions. And when you just think about even in growing up and the things that you were thinking about, I mean, even as I was growing up, I never imagined being down in Texas when NASA was starting to build the Space Center outside of Houston. And that completely changed the dreams or the visions that I even had. Not even consider that to be a possibility growing up as a little farm boy in the northeast part of Iowa. Rural community, never even had that as a vision. Those thoughts and ideas are what then start to shape the assumptions that you and I make about life. It's the reality. It's how you view, and this is what you think life is like. The challenge that we have is that those assumptions then, whether we are even thinking about them or not, that's what drives our conduct. It's what drives the things that you decide to do and not do. Because it's all built on this environment, the experience, the word, the language, the thoughts, the ideas. And these assumptions drive these actions, and you and I want to be around other people that are the same. We just do. That's inherent. Birds of a feather flock together. That's what forms a culture. That's what forms an ethnic group. And it is important to understand that when we're talking about culture, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about these ethnic groups that have formed. And what do they want to do? They want to preserve that. They want to keep that identity. They want to keep the way and the life and the expectations and the traditions. And so we institutionalize it. That's why governments are formed. That's why the laws are formed. That's why the schools are there, the churches, because we congregate around those that think alike. And then you can understand a child that is born now into that environment is now going to experience it, and around it goes. And that becomes a settled way of thinking. It's our worldview. And my encouragement is that what we need to do is to have a Jesus worldview. We need to be looking at life. We need to be looking at the things that you and I are experiencing from Jesus' perspective, not from the culture's perspective. Because as you look at that diagram, you're going to see the culture is going to continue to push on you to emphasize and to try to control that worldview. And the reality of it is that Jesus wants it to be the other way around. He wants us to be the ones that are influencing the culture, and that's a challenge. And that leads us to ask some of these questions. I'm going to turn this on here. Ask these questions. How much of our culture is it appropriate for us to integrate? I mean, we're living in this culture. Can we indeed integrate some of that into our life? How do you even look at your work? You understand that when you're looking at the work that you're involved in, that has been so shaped by your understanding and your expectations of the culture. And the question is, well, how do we look at that when we consider the gospel? Probably the most challenging one for us, how do we understand our involvement in politics? The reality of it is, that's what's going to end up happening. You and I are going to be looking at life, and we're going to have a certain understanding about what is going on. This is your worldview, and it is being influenced by the culture. And so how are we going to decide? A well-known professor wrote the following. He said, he is jealous and proud of it, petty, unjust, unforgiving, control freak, a vindictive, a bloodthirsty, ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, capriciously malevolent bully. Who do you think he's talking about? For those of you who are at the adult Bible class, no. He's talking about God. This is written by Richard Dawkins. He's a proclaimed atheist. He wrote this book 2006. 3 million copies have been sold of this, translated into 30 different languages. And he's taught here in the United States. He's taught over in England. He, prior to that, in '76, wrote A Selfish Gene. He is the one that is probably the prime promoter of what we would consider to be evolutionary biology. This is the text that the scientific community will turn to understand that. And his whole thought was that genes imitate one another. And so he's the one that coined the phrase, a meme. We hear that today on the internet. Internet memes. What does that mean? He's talking about this imitation. And so his whole understanding is that's what evolution is all about. Can you imagine the influence this man has had in our culture? If that's not enough, in 1917, there was a survey. Leading scientists were asked, do you believe in a personal God? Why is this so important, the way it's phrased this way? Because it's not just do you believe in God, or even a God, but a personal God. A God that you can have a relationship with. 1914, leading scientists were asked this. 31.6% said yes, they do. They then replicated exactly the same survey in 1998. Only 7% said yes. Well, folks, that is a huge change. These scientists, these are the ones that are in the colleges, the universities. They are the ones that are teaching. They are the ones that are teaching the students who are then becoming teachers in our school systems and across the board. Do you not think that this has had an incredible impact in our culture? How are we to respond to this? This is what is being pushed. When you think of that worldview and you look at that chart, this is what is being pushed down on us, even as Christians. If that's not bad enough, the Gallup poll did a survey just this last year, and they asked this question: is religion essential to your daily life? Now, religion is generic. What religion? Their whole point was, do you see any aspect of your religion or your faith impacting you in your walk, in your daily life? They did this back in 2015, and 66% said yes. Last year, 49%. Statistically, that is a huge drop. You understand that? In 10 years, this huge drop. Do not see, our culture does not see religion, when you and I think about it, it's not having any impact. How are we to respond to this? Gallup poll made the following statement: it means the United States is undergoing one of the world's most dramatic cultural shifts, transitioning from a faith-centered nation to one where religion no longer defines the daily lives of most people. Who of us would not say, yeah, we understand it, we look at it. All you have to do is just look at what's going on. And you're just saying, wow, what impact are we even having if this is what's taking place? Remember, look at that chart on the worldview. That is what is pushing you. That's what's pushing me. It's what's pushing our families. It's what's pushing the culture, the whole environment around here in San Antonio. This is what is impacting us. Jesus made it very clear, because you and I look at this and he said, wow, what are we going to do about it? Jesus says, the world is against us. Just understand that. It is. He tells his disciples, if the world hates you, know that it hated me before it hated you. And if you were of the world would love you at its own. And kind of latch on to that. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. When you think of this, think of the masses of the people. This is, when you look at this survey that I was just talking about, this is what the public and the sentiment and the understanding of our general public in this country thinks and believes, and it's the way they're acting. It was the Senate race, to remember, captured the attention of the entire nation. Two candidates, one was emphasizing that our laws and policies and everything they had should have a morality basis to it. The other one said, no, it really ought to just be left up to the public, especially each state. They should be able to have their say as to what's going to be going on. Garnered media attention, spread throughout the country. At one debate that they had, there was 18,000 people that were there, heckling, cheering, all going on. The one candidate, especially the one that was emphasizing the morality basis, made the following statement. Listen to this very, very carefully. He said, in this and like communities, public sentiment is everything. With public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. Consequently, he who molds public sentiment goes deeper than he who enacts statutes or pronounces decisions. He makes statutes and decisions possible or impossible to be executed. What's he saying? He is speaking to a following reality: the cultural influence of public sentiment. Think about that. It's the public, it's what the majority of the people is what they are thinking. That is what is going to influence what's going on. And this gentleman just made this very clear. You can pass all of the laws, you can issue all the executive orders that you want. If the public sentiment is not for it, or if you're sensing it's against it, you're going to hear the outcry. There's going to be pushback, because it's the public sentiment that is going to be driving this outcome. When Moses went up to Mount Sinai to get up to the top, to get the 10 Commandments, he comes back down, and what have they done in the meantime? They've made the golden calf. They have this idol. And Moses asked Aaron, what did this people do to you that you have brought such a great sin upon them? If you go back and read that, it was the public sentiment. It's all the people coming along saying, and Aaron fell for it. It was public sentiment. Saul and his army are facing the Philistines, and Samuel told him, before you engage with the Philistines, wait for me, because I'm going to come and offer a sacrifice before you go into battle. People in the army are starting to scatter. Saul gets nervous, so he offers a sacrifice. Just as he does it, Samuel shows up and says this, what have you done? And Saul said, when I saw that the people were scattering from me, he did this. Last part of verse 12. So I forced myself and offered the burnt offering. This is public sentiment, influencing in an incredible way. It influenced Aaron. It influenced Saul. It even influenced the religious leaders in Jesus' day. They said this about Jesus: if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. Wow. The public, they are concerned about the public being swayed to following Jesus. Public sentiment is powerful, man. It just is. You got to understand that. I mean, this is the country that we live in, and it's going to be the populace that is going to end up driving things, whether we like it or not. So the question is, how in the world are we as Christians to even respond to this? If you're wondering about that Senate debate, that was between Douglas and Lincoln. This was in 1858. Lincoln lost the Senate election, but because of these transcripts of these debates being scattered across the nation, the public sentiment swayed towards him, so that in 1860, he won the presidential election. It was an incredible influence. But something happened. He's elected at the beginning of November. On December 20th, that same year, South Carolina secedes from the Union. Why? They knew that the handwriting was on the wall. They knew that Lincoln knew and was going to state, because the issue that they were dealing with was slavery. And they knew where Lincoln stood. They knew this was not going to bode well for them. It was the sentiment. It was the public sentiment of these southern states that drove them to secede. I really believe, and this is where I think sometimes the challenge comes in, I believe this is specifically this one with Lincoln, with the secession of these states. That's an example of nationalism. Now, why do I say that? These states were so concerned about their whole cultural identity, who they were, the values that they have, the economic impact this was going to have if they were no longer going to be able to have slaves. Think about it. I mean, that was their whole livelihood. Everything about them was dealing with that. And they were afraid that they were going to lose, and they wanted to protect that. They were going to protect it at any cost, even to the point then of seceding from the Union. They weren't going to allow that to dictate who they were. And see, I think that that's the problem, because when you and I think of nationalism, we tend to think of countries. But nationalism isn't dealing with countries. It's dealing with this cultural mindset. Because you see, nationalism is a belief system that emphasizes loyalty to a common culture. That's what nationalism is. It's not dealing with a country. Nationalism isn't dealing with the United States or with Israel or with Myanmar or Nigeria. It's dealing with ethnic groups. There are over 500 ethnic groups in our United States. Each one of them trying to preserve, trying to emphasize this commonality of a culture. And then you can understand why there are so many conflicts. When you look at any of the conflicts that are going on, you're understanding, well, the reality of it is there's a part of nationalism that is good because it unifies, it has common understanding, we celebrate that. There's interests that we have, and we want to preserve that. But it also has an incredible downside, a huge downside. In fact, I think the downside is even more important to understand so that we don't get caught up into it. It creates division. It creates exclusion. It creates conflicts. That's what is creating conflicts like in Myanmar or Nigeria or Sudan. Those are ethnic conflicts. It's going on around the world, and it's going on inside this country right now. These are ethnic groups trying to dominate. That's what nationalism will lead to. Who wants to have their culture being said that it's not as good as the next culture? How do we rate that? How do we even understand it? And yet that's what's happening. That's what nationalism will do. If you celebrate that, then the problem is it's saying my culture is better than your culture and I'm going to dominate. Last week I had shared with you about this Alexis Tocqueville, who wrote this Democracy in America. And he made this incredible statement about how we in this culture, this is in 1831 before the Civil War, we in this culture have gotten sucked up into materialism. We are more concerned about what we have than doing what we know is right. And he coined a phrase. It's the tyranny of the majority. I actually like that better than this cultural domination. He was very aware of this. Listen to this. It is what happens when a majority group uses its power in a democracy to oppress or disregard the rights, interests, and welfare of minority groups, especially making decisions solely for themselves, which threatens fairness and justice. Do you understand what he's saying? That is what nationalism will lead to. It's going to lead to a tyranny of the majority. The majority people are going to try to drive what is happening. You need to understand something. This is about us. This is, catch this, man. Take this home and remember this. This is the antithesis of the gospel. No way does this have anything at all to do with the gospel. Do you understand that? We're caught up in this thought that somehow nationalism is going to be the key to our success, or somehow we're going to dominate, and this is what we are all about. That is not what the gospel is about, man. It isn't. We have forgotten this. We've gotten so caught up into this cultural domination. That's what drove South Carolina and the rest of the states to leave. They were afraid of what was going to happen to them if they were going to be dominated. This whole understanding, when you think of nationalism, it becomes even more of an issue when you add religion. When you think of nationalism and you start to think of ethnic groups and you start to think of Islam, then you start to understand why this is so critical for Muslims. Because God is into the picture. And there was two gentlemen, they're named by Whitehead and Perry, and they wrote a book that is called Taking America Back for God. They wanted to understand, what is this all about? What's happening? What's taking place in our culture today? Why is there this desire for us to think that we somehow, as Christians, need to dominate as a cultural identity as to what's going on. Now, we can understand that. But when Tim Keller, theologian, beloved pastor, he was a graduate of Gordon Conwell, where I had gone, where Lita was the dean of students. He's now with the Lord. He read this book and wrote a beautiful synopsis of trying to capture what these men were talking about. Listen to this. During the January 6th storming of the Capitol, rioters exhibited Christian symbols and offered public prayer. Since then, the working assumption of the mainstream media is that evangelicalism, which would include us here, has now been revealed to be a white American supremacist insurrection force committed to keeping power, even if it means overturning democratic processes. The term Christian nationalist is now being used to describe white evangelicals. And he wants to know, is that accurate? Would that describe you? Does that describe me? Because these two terms, as far as the world is concerned, this is what the mainstream media is putting out. This is how they're going to be looking at it. If you start to talk about any of this, you and I are going to be thrown into this category. And so you have to understand, this is not a new issue. We sometimes think that this is a new issue. We're dealing with this now in our mindset and in our way right now, and it's just garnered more attention because of what's been going on in the past decade or so. But the reality of it is this has been a challenge from the very beginning of the church. It's the reason that the epistles were written. They were struggling with how in the world do you live in this culture that these churches were finding themselves in? How do you live in that culture and not compromise the gospel? That's why there's a challenge. How are we as Christians then to live in this environment? And what's the challenge? Paul wrote the following to the Philippians. He said, it is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be at all ashamed, but that with full courage, now as always, Christ will be honored in my body, whether by life or death. He is in prison because he's standing counter to what the culture is. The Roman culture is dominating, and he's in prison because obviously the gospel is going to be speaking against that. And this word that he uses here for honor is megalino. That means to make great, to exalt, to honor, to magnify. And he's saying that is what he wants to do. The question is, how do you do that? How do you magnify? How do you exalt Christ? To understand what Paul is saying, he is talking about in this culture, he says, I want to exalt Jesus, not an ethnic group. He's not trying to exalt Israel. He's not trying to say Israel is the solution to this. He's saying Jesus is the solution to this. The United States is not the solution. It's Jesus. It's not any other country. It's Jesus. Notice what he says, and I find this amazing. Knowing Paul, when you read his letters in that, he says, I am not ashamed. What do you mean he's not ashamed? I would dare say, if you and I get involved in any kind of discussion, what is going on here, and you use the name Jesus, the discussion is going to take on a whole different tone. It just is. If you do, as I had suggested last week, if you take on this world view and you want to be asked, well, what do you do? And you say, well, I'm a follower of Jesus. That's going to take on a whole different conversation. Paul realizes you start talking about Jesus, it's going to take some courage. And the word that he uses here for courage is this parousia. And that is this confidence or this boldness, but specifically in speaking. So we don't catch that. We're just thinking, we're not thinking courage in terms of, in a military term. There's a boldness that he has. This is this wisdom, this understanding of how you should be speaking, what you should be saying in the environment that you're in. It gives you this confidence. This is what Peter and John experienced. They are before the Sanhedrin. A man has just been healed. He was lame, he's walking, he's leaping. And then this is what they say to the religious leaders. Remember, these are fishermen who are now before the elite. And they say this, let it be known to all of you and to all people of Israel that by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom you crucified, whom God raised from the dead. By him, this man is standing before you well. This Jesus is the stone that was rejected by you, the builders, which has become the cornerstone. And there is salvation in no one else, for there was no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. The leaders then made the following observation. Now, when they saw the boldness, that's the parousia, of Peter and John, and perceived that they were uneducated, common men, they were astonished, and they recognized that they had been with Jesus. The disciples, Peter and John, returned to the other disciples, and they said, now, Lord, look upon their threats and grant to your servants to continue to speak your word with all boldness. This is a courage, this is a boldness to be able to speak, but it is important to understand this is not coming from themselves. They know this and they understand it. As I was thinking about this, when you look at that passage, the reason I wanted to share that passage, because there are four things that come out that are sort of underlined and are grounded in parousia. First one is God's power. Jesus was raised from the dead. This man was healed by God's power. They emphasized God's promises. They knew what God had promised. You and I know what God has promised. You know what his power is like. You know what he can do. You know what his promises are. You know what his purposes are. Salvation is in Jesus. It's not in Israel. It's not in the United States. It's not in anything else. It's in Jesus. And we can speak that. But it's also God's presence. They had been present. They had walked with Jesus. You and I can have this same parousia. And in my mind, man, this is exactly what is needed today. You and I need to have parousia. We need to have this boldness to not be ashamed to use the name of Jesus in any of the discussions that you and I are having. And that's not what happens. It just isn't. There's an underlying fear that if we start talking about Jesus, we're going to be thrown into this category of either being these white supremacists or you're just too good, you're holier than thou. That's why there's a caution. Paul wrote the following caution. There has to be a balance to this boldness. And this comes from his second letter to Timothy. And I use the Message translation because it captures this in a powerful way. He says to Timothy, don't be naive. There are difficult times ahead. As the end approaches, people are going to be self-absorbed, money-hungry, self-promoting, stuck-up, profane, contemptuous appearance, crude, coarse, dog-eat-dog, unbending, slanderers, impulsively wild, savage, cynical, treacherous, ruthless, bloated windbags, addicted to lust, and allergic to God. And then he says the following, they'll make a show of religion, but behind the scenes they're animals. Stay clear of these people. What a challenge, what a caution to give to Timothy. Because there's this reality that when you and I listen or hear or see anything today, we have to ask the question, is it just a show of religion? Paul is saying, stay clear of that. What do you see? What do you see? Do you see Jesus being exalted, or is this just a show of religion? Man, I'm going to have enough parousia to say this is not exalting Jesus. It isn't. This is simply a show of religion that's trying to engender people to think that somehow God is behind all of this. It's not exalting Jesus. It's not saying, look to Jesus, let's live for him. Let's do everything that we're doing. It's not. It's a show of religion. Got a challenge for you men. Table talk time. I didn't fill this out in your chart because I didn't want you to be thinking about it until I show it up here. I want you to ask whether the following motto is a show of religion or not. In God we trust. That's a motto. Is that a show of religion? Spend some time here. Talk it over at your tables. Okay, gentlemen, just listening to kind of the discussion. Don't know what your thoughts are, but it was in 1956. We were in the throes of our dialogue or in our issues with the Soviet Union, which was obviously a very declared atheistic nation. And the public sentiment in our country was that we wanted to stand solidly against that image. And so President Eisenhower signed into law that our motto was now going to be, "In God we trust." And it replaced what motto? E pluribus unum. What a change. How are we going to get around this for the First Amendment? Just a minute, whoa, just a minute here, hold it. First Amendment, freedom of religion, can't put this down. What are you saying as a government? You're saying that we're supposed to now trust in God? I thought that wasn't supposed to happen. There was a law professor in Yale in 1962 that declared, oh, things like this are known as ceremonial deism. And the Supreme Court, Brenham, even Sandra Day O'Connor, have declared this is nothing but rote. It's just a historical phrase that really has absolutely no meaning whatsoever. You understand what deism is? Deism is the declaration that there, quote, is a God, but there's no divinity, there's no, in fact, deism declares that you cannot even trust in any kind of religious text, so don't turn to them. That's what this motto is. That's what it was declared to be. They reject deism. Deists reject all supernatural. That's what Thomas Jefferson was. He even wrote his own Bible where he took and cut and pasted different Bibles and completely got rid of all of the declarations where Jesus did any miracle or if there was any declaration of him being divine. You see, this motto really shouldn't be "In God we trust." It probably should be "In a God we trust," with a little g. Because that's in reality what it has been declared as. It's a show of religion. It has become a show of religion. There might have been an intent behind it if if you think that it really would be good for us to go back and rewind and get back to our Christian values that maybe our founding fathers were, then I would like to submit to you that what that motto should really be on all of our currency, all your coins, all the paper one, it should not say in God we trust, it should say in Jesus we trust. Now, how do you think that's going to go over? Do you understand the reality, men? This is where the rubber meets the road. If we're thinking that this is what it is, then we have got to understand something's not right. It's a challenge. And I want to go back to Scripture. How do we look at we even look at culture? I'm going to go through this kind of quickly here. This ought to be the rallying cry for Marines. Hoorah! Instead of hoorah. It stands for decree, ordinance, regulations, and statutes. In the Old Testament, there is no word in the Greek or Hebrew that is translated as the word culture, but it's there. This gets translated as the word custom. Why? If you go back and look at that worldview, what shapes the institutional and the decrees and the laws and everything that you have? It's the culture. It's what cultures we're going to do. That's what instituted it. That's why when God said the following to the Israelites, to the Hebrews, he said, "You shall therefore keep all my statutes and all my rules and do them, that the land where I am bringing you to live may not vomit you out, and you shall not walk in the hookah of the nation." He wanted them to stand in distinct to that culture. The closest word probably in Greek, at least that we could think of, is probably ethos. This is where they're brought before. This is where Paul and Silas are brought before Philippi because they've dealt with this demon out of this slave girl. And what do the people say? They advocate customs, ethos. And listen what they say, that are not lawful for us as Romans to accept or practice. Do you see the contrast? Paul is emphasizing something that the Romans are saying, we can't do that. That's against our culture. The closest word that we probably have is the word cosmos. That means creation. It can mean all people, but in most of the emphasis that we're going to see, it really means the world system. It's the culture. That's what is dominated. When Jesus says to the disciples, he says to them, the world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify about it that its works are evil. So we know he's not talking about creation. You would never say that the creation's works are evil. He's not talking about people specifically because he said it's its works. So you know he's talking about this world system. And that's why John writes this in his epistle, do not love the world or the things of the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. And that's why you realize the challenge that we have. The world is going to want to squeeze us. It leaves us with this sense that if you're living in this culture, then there's an identity that you have in this culture. On your handout, you have a fill in the blank. How would you fill in the blank? I am a citizen of what? What would you say? Heaven? What would most people say? United States. That's a cultural response. It's natural. That's our lingo. We understand that. And what Christian nationalism wants to promote is to say, you are a citizen of this United States. So you better get with it. Because we want to make it a Christian one. So therefore, if you're going to be a citizen of this country, then you need to be a Christian. Paul says, no, our citizenship is in heaven. Thank you, Mike. And we're waiting for a Savior. What should first and foremost be in your mind is that you are a citizen of heaven, of the kingdom. That's not what we think. That's not how we identify ourselves. It just isn't. When you and I talk about life in this culture, we're talking about citizenship in this country. God was very clear. He was not about trying to create some unique culture identity with his people. In a way he was, but listen to what he says. He says to them regarding his rules and his laws, keep them and do them, for that will be your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples, who when they hear and see these statutes will say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. he is not talking the nation. He's not talking about Israel. He's talking about this ethnic group that he has formed. It's that ethnic group. It's that ethnos that he is saying. That is what's going to be a light to the people. That's why Jesus said, in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good works and do what? Give glory to your Father in heaven. It's all about you and me living in a way that people are going to see that we are followers of Jesus. Paul writes it this way, only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ. The word for citizen is polite. And this polite, it's this understanding that that's what it means to be a citizen. And polituo is the verb form of that, which means to live as a good citizen. So he says, let your manner of life. Live as a citizen of the kingdom in a way that people are going to know. Our word cosmopolitan that we have, it comes from world and polite, which means citizen. The contrast, the citizen of the world. You see the contrast. Man, what we're doing is that we've got to understand that when you and I are looking at what we are experiencing today, know this, the world's values, beliefs, and morals, think ethos, are not only distinct from God, but they are in rebellion to God. Who of you and me do not understand when you look at what's going on in this culture today? We realize there is so much that is completely distinct from the culture, and that's what we're fighting against. When you look at any of the issues, when you look at abortion or gender identity and gay rights, we know the scripture is very clear to that, but we leave out the other half of it. God is just as concerned about the rights for the poor and the widow and the immigrants. And he says, you need to be a citizen of the kingdom and think like Jesus. And if we think that we can just get back to having some kind of cultural identity that we can be as Christians, then you got to remember what happened to Israel. God was their king. All his rules, laws, everything that he had completely shaped their identity. That's why he said, go and live so that other people can see that. Did they? The people say to Samuel, then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, behold, you are old and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. My, oh my. Why would they want to do that? Why would they want to reject God? God was their king. If we're thinking that this is what's happening in our country, why do you think we've gotten into the situation that we're in right now? The realization is that if you look at any of history, you look at even of Israel, you got to know sin is going to rear its ugly head no matter how much we think that we might be trying to live for Jesus. So how are we going to do this? Historically, there's been 5 ways that people have looked at Christ and culture, just going through these real briefly. There's Christ against the culture. This is what Tertullian did. His whole sense is you got to live apart from the culture. Just get away from the culture because it's influence. Well, how in the world are you going to fulfill the Great Commission to go and make disciples of all nations if you avoid? That's what the Amish have done. There's Christ above the culture. This is this sense that, well, God created culture, right? So it's got to be good. So let's learn from the culture. But the problem is you start to look at the culture to start to identify what is true and what is not true. Luther supported Christ in the culture and paradox. You're living in the 2 kingdoms, the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of the world. Simultaneously just and simultaneously a sinner. Bottom line, what does he say? Deal with it. Deal with it from the standpoint you're living in the culture. Understand that there's that tension. Don't reject it. Don't circle the wagons. Understand that you need to live in that. Augustine said we need to be the transformers of the culture. Now, this sounds great. What's the problem? The culture is changing faster than what you and I are changing. Just look at what's happened over the past 10 years in our culture. The things that have popped up that we hadn't even thought about before. Now we're dealing with artificial intelligence. How are we supposed to? It changes so fast. How in the world are you going to transform it? The last one, the most dangerous, Christ of culture. These are those that basically are saying, hey, you can take the religious teachings, you can take the moral teachings that Jesus had, and you can take them or leave them. Just try to be faithful to it. Believe it or not, this is what shaped the founding fathers' mindset. Yes, there were some that were Christians. but there were many more that were just interested in wanting to make sure that when you look at the Constitution, look at our Bill of Rights, they're shaped around the ethical understanding of the morality and the teaching of the Judeo-Christian thing, but no declaration of Jesus. You're not going to see anywhere in any document a declaration to say that we need to worship Jesus. That's what Paul said. So what are we to do? How in the world are we to do it? I would like to encourage us, we need to live set-apart lives. That's what Peter said when he says, in your hearts, set apart Christ as Lord. Don't set apart Christ in some way where you're still trying to hold on and think that the culture is going to be the thing that's going to be the saving grace. He said it's going to be the Lord. And that's what hagios is the word. That word holy means separation. It's also translated as saint. The verb form hagiazo means to sanctify or to set apart. This is not trying to be a holier than thou. This is simply saying that when God says set something apart, he says, it was used for this. Now I want you to take you and set you apart and use you for this. I want you to be set apart so I can use you in my kingdom. That's the whole thing that Paul says in Romans. Don't be conformed to this world. Other translations, don't conform any longer to the pattern of this world. Message says, don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Wow, that's exactly what this Alexa de Tocqueville said. You become so wrapped up in this, you can't even tell the difference. That's what Christ of the culture will do. You can't see or make any kind of distinction. The way you talk, think, act has become like the culture. There's one Greek word that is used there. Just love this. Sukematizo, long word. That whole word means do not be conformed. It's where we get our word schematic. So when you think of this being this sukematizo, think of this reality. It's a schematic. Think of this. This is a culture schematic. If you want to wire something in your house so that a fan and a light work, this is the way it has to be wired. If it's not wired this way, the light isn't going to work and the fan isn't going to work. This is the way it has to be wired. What does the culture say? You have to be wired in a certain way to experience success, to climb, to experience the American dream. You have to be wired this way because if you want to be accepted and you want to live, this is the way you need to be wired. And Paul is saying, don't be wired that way. And so what do you think is going to happen when you're not wired that way? Don't be ashamed. That's what Paul is saying. Don't be ashamed to live in a set-apart way from the rest of the culture. That is hard. Just think, friends, neighbors, co-workers, family even. What are you trying to do? I'm trying to live for Jesus. That's why John in his prayer, I have given them your word and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I do not ask you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. And then he says this, sanctify them, set them apart, make them distinct. How? In the truth. His word is truth. As you sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. And then he says this, for their sake I consecrate myself. He sets himself apart that they may be also sanctified in truth. I was stationed in Heidelberg, Germany in the late 70s. And Lita and I were working with single servicemen and women. Even though I was an officer, it was frowned upon. But we wanted to influence these young men and women. And there was a second lieutenant who was working with us, a guy by the name of Tom Sutton. And I got connected with him through other ways, probably about 40 years later. In fact, it was after we had moved here to San Antonio. And just had a wonderful discussion and just talking with him. And it came out that he shared something with me that I was never aware of. He, as a Christian in the Army in Heidelberg, Germany, was really struggling. He was overwhelmed because he could not see how he could live as a Christian in this godless culture of the U.S. Army. Now, yes, there were Christians, but overall, when you looked at it, when Lita and I were there, the things that went on at some of the parties were appalling. And he just could not understand how in the world can you live in this way. And it was overwhelming him. And he said, Dan, he said, your wife's boss, he was a full colonel. His name was King James Kaufman. He had an incredible impact on Lita's life and my life. To watch this man, to see him live. And he told Lieutenant Sutton, he says, Lieutenant Sutton, I want you to do one thing. I want you to be a follower of Jesus in your circle of influence. He said it changed. He said, I was so overwhelmed by trying to affect everybody. And Colonel Kaufman simply focused and just said, Lieutenant Sutton, whoever you are around, these are the people that you're around. Be a follower of Jesus in that environment. That's what Peter is saying. The rest of that verse, but in your hearts set apart Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. Where's the hope? Man, if your hope is thinking that we need to get our nation to become a Christian nation, it's not going to work. It hasn't. It didn't work for Israel. Why would you think it would work for us? If we thought that that's the way it started, well, then how did we get to where we are? Because we're not setting apart Christ as Lord in our hearts. It's the circle of influence. It's the people that you are around. Let me give you a couple examples. I'm a member of the Fightin' Texas Aggie Band class of 1970. I know my older brother does this as well, but there's a group of us that get together once a month, usually once a month. We get together on Aggie Zoom and we just talk about life. Our group never talks about politics. But this last group meeting that we had was overwhelming. Some of them were starting to share about how life was starting to they were closer to the end than they are to the beginning. Starting to see parents that are going through difficulties. And then my roommate, who was one of the drum majors, said, men, he said, you have got to get serious with the Lord. You've got to get serious with him. You're too close to the end. Don't let it go by. One of the other guys popped up, Mac. He said, oh, yeah, hey, Gower, that's exactly right. That's what we need to be doing. And he said, we not only should be taking him serious, but he says, we need to be out and doing some work. We need to be living for him. We need to be doing things for him. A little bit of a pause, and he says, hey, Dan-Lita, what do you think about all of this? And I said, man, that is exactly what we need to be doing. Do you understand? That is the circle of influence where you can talk about Jesus, and yet we don't. What do? We talk about politics. Who is your circle of influence? Who are those people that you were around? Who are those that you rub shoulder with? Be a follower of Jesus for those that you are around. And if everybody does that, guess what's going to happen? That will start to have an impact. It's going to happen from the bottom up. It will never happen from the top down. Two other examples. There's a group known as Ratio Christi, the Reason for Christ. It is a group of Christian students that are on campuses across this country that have this as their motto: to defend the Christian faith in honest dialogue with both our skeptical and believing friends. Together we investigate the historical, philosophical, and scientific reasons for the truth, rationality, and the significance of the message of Jesus Christ. No political agenda. This is not about trying to formulate some political agenda. It's trying to address people, students, who are being challenged by people like Richard Dawkins. That's their circle of influence. It's the people that they were around. I didn't know that the following existed. The Christian Faculty Network. There's one at A&M. The purpose of the Christian Faculty Network at Texas A&M University is to glorify Jesus Christ by enriching the ideological diversity of the university community with Christian worldview. Can you imagine? Here are professors who are saying we want to make a difference for Jesus in the life of our students. It's their circle of influence. There are 250 professors at Texas A&M that are doing this. Can you imagine that? I didn't even know that. That is their circle of influence to try to combat the things that are going on. There's also one at Texas University. They're across Auburn has a big one. A&M probably has the largest. Bottom line, what will transform the culture are transformed people. It will not work the other way around. It will not. Do not think that if we can just transform our culture, that's going to transform people. It will not work. It never has. Read through the biblical narrative and you'll find out, no, it will not work. It has to be people that are transformed. And when you do that, and you are a follower of Jesus in your circle of influence, whoever you're around, and you start talking about Jesus, that is what will transform people. There's a wonderful promise in 1 John. For everyone who has been born of God overcomes the world. And this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Who is it that overcomes the world except the one who believes that Jesus is the Son of God? He makes it very clear. You want to overturn the world? You want to overturn the world system? It's going to be because of you believing in Jesus. And that's the challenge. It just is. I mean, this raises questions. How in the world are we supposed to be involved in politics? Should we be concerned about who we're electing? Well, yes. But to what end? I would suggest that if you're going to be voting for a politician, the first and foremost primary thing should not be, is it a show of religion, or are they using the right words that sort of fit with you and your political ideology, or are they radically living for Jesus? We want to have leaders in our country, no matter what level that they're at, that are going to be promoting Jesus, not some political identity, not some agenda that they're trying. That's not going to change anything. It never has. It never will. You understand that every 4 years, every 8 years, it just completely changes? If we are living as radical disciples of Jesus Christ, man, that is what's going to change. And I have to challenge you. This is a huge challenge. Are you living as a citizen of the world or for yourself? Or a citizen of the kingdom? Living for Jesus. That's a huge, huge challenge. It just is. You have to ask, who are you living for? And it doesn't mean that we are not going to be involved in the things that are going on, but this has got to be the bottom line. It just has to be. The story is told of a French marshal, Lute, and he asked his gardener that tomorrow, he says, I want you to go and plant a tree out in the yard here because we need some shade. And the gardener comes back to him and says, sir, he says, this tree is not going to mature and provide shade for 100 years. And you want me to go and plant it tomorrow? And the general said, oh, no, I'm sorry. Plant it today. What a powerful statement. Man, if this is not in your mindset, start today. Don't wait for tomorrow. Start today. Declare that you are a follower of Jesus and that you're going to do that in your circle of influence, that you're going to have a world view. You're going to have a phroneo like he had. You're going to see life the way he had it, not the way the culture is trying to squeeze you into its mold to thinking this is what's going to make life different. It just isn't. That is what is going to change who you are, the people that you're around. That is what will change your culture. Let's pray. Father, thank you. Thank you for reminding us of these truths today. Lord, you know we struggle with this at times. You know that we've lived life and maybe some of the things that we're doing, we're thinking that they're having an impact, and maybe it's starting to sink in that there's something different that maybe we need to be doing. And so I pray that as we think on those things, Jesus, that it's going to be all about exalting you, magnifying you, lifting you up, and not a culture, not even a way of life. Only a way of life if it's your way of life. So, Father, may your Spirit well up inside each one of us. May you speak deep into our hearts. May those that we even connect with have this same kind of a mindset.